Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today is August 3rd. We are now just 3 months exactly away from the November elections. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are obviously off doing their own thing, but as we're going to talk about here, it's time to update our Senate election prediction video. This is such an interesting election cycle given what we're seeing on the Senate level in this country. Right now, as you can see, it's 35 to 30 just in terms of the races that are not up for re-election. However, the current Senate map, with everybody currently serving in Congress, features 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats. So the Democratic Party needs an absolute minimum of 3 seats in order to get to a possible majority. They need 3 seats and the vice presidency in order to obtain the majority. But as we've outlined, it's possible that they could need as many as 5 seats, given that they are expected to lose in Alabama and are also, they could lose the presidential election. So let's get right into it. In the state of Alaska here, Al Gross has kind of, he hasn't really generated as much excitement as he originally was. There were people who felt that he could potentially win this race. Remember, Alaska is a state that, the Democrats outperform the presidential numbers on. Mark Begich was able to become a senator and a governor from the state of Alaska. The Democrats, of course, have the potential spot in the House race here. Dan or Don Young, I can't remember who has been around, older than the hills, could potentially lose this race. However, Dan Sullivan, even after that gaffe he made, the same thing Marco Rubio did, posting a picture of him with Elijah Cummings upon trying to make a tribute to John Lewis, gave this. Is doing just fine in the polling here. So I'm going to have this as a likely Republican hold. In the state of Oregon, this is going to be safe. There was a brief moment in time where it appeared that the Democrats might have a little bit of a trouble here, but no longer. Idaho, same thing. Wyoming, another safe Republican hold. In the state of Montana, this is the first Republican seat that is in real danger of being flipped here. Steve Daines, the incumbent, is being challenged by the extremely popular Democratic governor Steve Bullock. This is a dead heat race right now. Originally, the first couple of this is a difficult state to poll, and there haven't been very many polls. Only I think there have been less than 5. The first couple had Steve Bullock leading Steve Daines, but the last 2 have seen that narrowing up just a little bit as Daines has regained his footing and has won the last 2 polls. So as a result, um, you know, right now, this state is in an absolute dead heat. It's obviously going to go to Donald Trump on the presidential level. The House race here is pretty competitive between Kathleen Williams and Matt Rosendale. Matt Rosendale, who's run for office like half a dozen times now. The governor's race, remember, the Democrats have had the governorship here, I believe, 3 straight cycles. And Mike Cooney, who's the lieutenant governor of this state, is challenging Greg Gianforte, who obviously has a color pass. Now, that race actually appears to be leaning the Republicans' way a little bit, and that'll be a good pickup for them to get a Republican governor finally back in this state. But it's very possible that Steve Bullock is going to win this race. And so, with 3 months out, this is a Democratic wave year. Obviously, we have a lot of evidence to suggest that because of Donald Trump's unpopularity, he is dragging down his own candidates. And so I think that this is going to go to Steve Bullock by a tilt margin. And it's remarkable to think that, in this state, with Jon Tester, that this could very well be a state with 2 Democratic senators when all is said and done. So there's one pickup for the Democrats. In the state of Colorado, John Hickenlooper was obviously the #1 recruit for the Democrats when they set out in this cycle. And here he is, pretty thoroughly defeating Cory Gardner. Now, the Republicans in recent days feel that they might actually have a little momentum here, as one poll showed Hickenlooper only up by 6 points. But the fact that I'm saying it's narrowing up because John Hickenlooper won a poll by 6 points basically shows you exactly where we are right now. So John Hickenlooper is going to be just fine here. I'm labeling this as a likely Democratic pickup. In the state of Arizona, Mark Kelly is doing exceptionally well against Martha McSally, probably, along with Cory Gardner, the most vulnerable incumbent Republican in this country. And so I think that because the polling is so one-sided right now, and because we have so little data to show that Martha McSally is going to win this race, and it's not even really narrowing up at all. I have Mark Kelly also likely winning this race. And so, with only one, two, three, four, five, with only 7 races counted out of 35 races across the country, the Democrats have already hit their absolute minimum that they needed to hit, which was 3 seats, and they have other opportunities elsewhere. They've already won in Arizona, they've picked up in Colorado, and picked up in Montana. New Mexico, this is an open race, but Ben Ray Lujan looks like he's easily going to win this race. South Dakota, those days of the Democrats having senators here is pretty long gone. Obviously, they had some success in the governorship race. Kristi Noem, the incumbent, had a tough time as her opponent captured 47% of the vote, but Mike Rounds is not going anywhere. Ben Sasse is also not going anywhere. Here's a big one: Kansas Senate primary. This primary is tomorrow on Saturday, August 4th, between Kris Kobach, who the Republicans hate as much as the Democrats do, because he's giving the Democrats a real shot to win this race. Roger Marshall is the more generic, sort of normal, if you will, Republican who is in that primary against Kris Kobach, and Barbara Bollier, who is, of course, the former Republican who the Democrats feel they have a chance to win with in this state. Could do just fine, given the fact that, remember, in 2018, the governorship race here, the Democrats managed to win that seat against Kris Kobach. And so, given the fact that it appears that Kris Kobach is going to just barely edge out Roger Marshall in the primary, I think that basically leaves this as only a tilt Republican. And that's a pretty bad sign for the Republicans, given that in a safe Republican state on the national level, it does appear as though they are barely hanging on for the possibility of having one Democratic senator and one Democratic governor in this state. Oklahoma, nothing to discuss there. Texas, this is not nearly as competitive a race as it was 2 years ago. MJ Hager is a good candidate for the Democratic Party, and she's still considered somebody that the Democrats want to keep track of and want to involve in future Senate races. However, John Cornyn is not really having much trouble right now. It's not, a wipeout. I think MJ Hager will get over 40%, and she'll probably get around 45%. But the reality of the situation is what we're seeing is John Cornyn is having much more trouble in his race compared to Donald Trump. And that can only mean one thing. It means that Republicans are shifting off of Donald Trump. So John Cornyn's going to be fine. I'm going to label this as likely. Minnesota, Tina Smith, that's going to be a safe Democratic state. Now, in the state of Iowa, obviously this is a big one here. This was a state that Joni Ernst, obviously, it was known that she was going to be up. But what wasn't really accepted was the fact that, early on, about 2 months ago, when the map was really being settled in the state of Arizona, Colorado, Montana, North Carolina, and Maine were sort of considered the main pickup opportunities for the Democratic Party. And no one really considered Iowa in that light. Well, here we are, and Theresa Greenfield, having won her primary, is defeating Joni Ernst. Now, it's very close, but she's defeating Joni Ernst. And let's put it this way, even though I'm going to get to this later, I sort of consider this kind of similar to the Georgia race, where one candidate is the Georgia regular race, rather, in that there's one candidate who's consistently leading, but by a very small margin. And that's where Theresa Greenfield is right now. And look, she keeps leading, and obviously, the low popularity of Donald Trump is hurting the Republican Party. And so as a result, I think this is going to go Theresa Greenfield's way, okay? Right now, this is a tight race, but that goes Theresa Greenfield, and there you go. There's 4 seats for the Democratic Party. And so basically a worst-case scenario puts them at 50 seats right now. In the state of Arkansas, the Democrats don't even really have a candidate here. Dan Whitfield is just a random independent who has decided to run. Meanwhile, Tom Cotton is basically has basically no chance of losing this race. Louisiana, the Democrats only fielded a candidate in recent weeks. Nothing to discuss there. Richard Durbin is going to be just fine in the state of Illinois as well. Now, in the state of Michigan, John James is trying again. He challenged Debbie Stabenow. He was a figure that the Republican Party felt they had a real shot with a couple of years back with Debbie Stabenow, and he did well. He got a little over 45% of the vote, but Debbie Stabenow still won. And now Gary Peters, who's by all accounts a less known senator, is doing worse, or rather is doing better against John James. And so that combined with Gretchen Whitmer flipping the governorship from red to blue, and all signs pointing towards Donald Trump having a really easy time here, or a really, a really hard time in this election, basically suggests that the Republicans are in dire straits right now in this state. Furthermore, John James was scheduled to speak at the Republican National Convention, which could give him a little bit of a bump. Of course, that's not really happening this time, so Gary Peters is going to be just fine. Kentucky. There was a brief moment in time when people thought Mitch McConnell was going to have some trouble, but that's just not going to happen. Mitch McConnell's going to be fine. Could end up being a likely margin, but he's going to be fine. Tennessee, same thing. Mississippi. I think that Mike Espy is a nice candidate for the Democrats, but this whole idea of just like a rematch between him and Cindy Hyde-Smith, there just haven't been enough voters that have shifted from one side to the other. And so in only 2 years, especially when it's the same candidate for crying out loud as a couple of years back. So I don't really see a reason to believe that this state is going to, I don't really see a reason to believe that this state is not going to go red. I'm going to label it likely. It could end up as a lean margin, but I'll leave it as a likely. In the state of Alabama, Doug Jones is in all likelihood going to lose this race against Tommy Tuberville, of course, the former football coach. As a result, Tommy Tuberville, someone who has absolutely no political experience, it is pretty much accepted at this point that, this is the Republicans' race to lose. And even though it's, Tommy Tuberville having defeated Jeff Sessions by such a large margin, it's pretty obvious that the Democrats are going to basically, they're not even really investing that hard in this race because they know that this is too big a lift right now. So I'm going to label that likely. Georgia, I'm not even really going to break down the special election because I think that that's pretty much safe. Even though Reverend Raphael Warnock has seen a little bit of a bump in the polls in recent weeks, it's not enough. In fact, it's still likely right now that the Republican Party is going to have both Senate seats when all is said and done. Or rather, they're going to have both candidates advance to the runoff. In the regular race, however, I compared this to Iowa earlier because I think that this is a scenario in which, David Perdue consistently leads Jon Ossoff, even though Ossoff has won a poll here or there, as opposed to Joni Ernst, who hasn't. But, Perdue only leads by a small margin every time, usually within the margin of error. So as a result, I'm going to label this as a tilt Republican state. The Democrats are putting a lot of money into this race. Jon Ossoff is somebody who's famous for being, a fundraising extraordinaire. Of course, he was part of the most expensive House race in United States history early on in Trump's term. South Carolina, Jamie Harrison obviously continues to set fundraising records, but it does not mean that Lindsey Graham is not going to win that race. We're going to label that likely. All right, North Carolina. This one is so interesting because Cal Cunningham has basically joined the ranks of Arizona and Colorado as sort of those early base pickup opportunities for the Democrats, ones you sort of immediately check off on the map. He consistently leads by 8, 9, 10, sometimes even 12 points over Thom Tillis, who is suddenly in a terrible polling position. And that combined with Roy Cooper, who's up for re-election, who's probably going to give Cal Cunningham a nice little bump on Election Day, I think the Democrats are going to really are going to have a field day in this state, also on the presidential level. Right now, I can't believe this is the first time I'm going to do this on this channel. I have this labeled as a likely Democratic pickup, and there you go. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pickups for the Democratic Party. Virginia, safe Democratic retention there. Okay, I don't really see much of a reason to believe that Mark Warner is not going to win this race. West Virginia, on the other hand, Shelley Moore Capito is going to be just fine. The vice presidency, we're also going to label that Democratic right now based off the polling we're seeing. on the national level. Delaware, nothing to discuss there. New Jersey, Cory Booker, nothing to discuss there. And as you can tell, Republicans at 48, they only need 2 more to reach that 50th seat. But now the Democrats have reached that 48 number as well. And they're going to take the lead with Jack Reed in the state of Rhode Island. And even though in Massachusetts, so far it looks like Ed Markey is going to be able to survive a very tough primary challenge against Joe Kennedy. So far, it looks like he's going to be able to survive that. And in the general election, there's not going to be any problem for him. And there you have it, 50 seats. The Democrats have the majority upon winning the vice presidency. New Hampshire, of course, for a while was a pretty competitive state on all levels for the Republicans, and it still is by and large, but Jeanne Shaheen is not facing much of a problem right now. Now, in 2 years, keep an eye on this state because Maggie Hassan is in a little bit of a difficult position in terms of, a reelection bid. She barely won in 2016. And she barely won her race in 2016, and it appears that Chris Sununu, the governor who is routinely winning polls by over 35 points, if they throw him at Maggie Hassan, it's very possible that he could win. So keep an eye on this seat in 2 years. Lastly, in the state of Maine, Susan Collins, of course, is facing her own very tough reelection campaign against the Democratic Speaker of the House, Sarah Gideon. I mean, there's basically no evidence so far to believe that Sarah Gideon is not going to win this race. However, what we do know is that Sarah Gideon is not leading in the polls by as big a margin as most people kind of expected her to be winning at this point in this race. And that's because, I think Susan Collins is a pretty resilient figure who does not lose easily and obviously has won, elections with pretty relative ease over the last 24 years. But that doesn't mean that Sarah Gideon's not winning this race. And that's why I have this as a lean Democrat. And so as you can tell, this is pretty much in congruence with my presidential election prediction videos, given what we're seeing, by and large across the board here. This is what, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is 6 pickups for the Democrats while also retaining their seats in New Hampshire, Michigan, and Minnesota, putting them at 52 seats to 48, despite losing one in Alabama. So thank you guys again so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button on the left if you haven't already, and comment down in the suggestions below if you have any. And that'll do it for this video, and I'll see you in November.